Friends at Deepwater Wind for their sponsorship. I am here on this beautiful sunny day with cha-ching, extra cha-ching today. Revenue numbers are up. Gary Sasse, he probably somehow found a way to get some percentage of it. What do you get, 1% off all revenue collected in the state of Rhode Island? Something you put in, some Robert Moses-esque thing you did when you were director of administration?
You got it backward. Every April 14th I send a check, and the check is getting bigger and bigger and bigger.
That's because you rich guys don't get all your windfalls like you used to, thanks to President Trump, right?
Okay, yeah.
Let's start off with the revenue numbers. Thursday afternoon, the revenue conference completed. Speaker Nick Mattiello walked over to Kate Nagel on the live on GoLocal and spilled the beans. Up about $130 million over what was estimated over the 2 years. $40 million, he said, were looking like one-time gains from Trump's tax reform.
We'll see if they're one time, but they were about $40 million from federal tax reform that helped the state, yes.
So are Democrats as upset about tax reform as they were going into it?
No, most of the states are experiencing a windfall from tax reform, and there's a real debate going on in several states between spending the money or refunding it back to the taxpayer. And you can imagine the lines that it falls upon. Other states are saying, well, let's take the money and do something big with it, fix our schools, or build something that will last for generations. So most states are experiencing the change, and it bears an explanation. So when you think of your federal tax return, there's adjusted gross income. And most states, about 30 states, start their state tax by adjusted gross income. And there's not too much of a bang for those states because that's just the definition of what adjusted income is. Other states tax taxable income, and because the federal government lowered its rates as it broadened the base and changed exemptions and deductions, the states have a broader base to tax from, and they haven't changed their rates, plus the capital gains increases. So most states will see a windfall from this tax change. In many states, the money will go back to the taxpayers because it wasn't intended for it to be a windfall. In other states, they'll invest in something that may go back to the taxpayers as a good investment. In other states, they'll just put it in the budget and we'll never know what happened to it.
It's good news for the state that the level of the enhanced revenue over what was anticipated. It doesn't fix all the holes. It's still about $130 million in necessary holes that need to be filled.
What it gives the state is kind of an election year recess, and the 135 million. The 135 million should not come as a surprise. We've discussed on this segment for a number of weeks about $125 million windfall as a result of how revenue collections were going.
Right.
So the 75 million this year, almost 60 million next year for the 130, but that's not all free money. There are a number of things that have to come out. We have to deduct their increased spending on caseloads, on Medicaid. That has to come out. The governor gave away COLAs, about $30 million in employee raises. That wasn't budgeted. That has to come out.
That's about, the speaker said combines about $30 million.
Yeah, the Medicaid, the Medicaid director said he wanted $16 million back in to deal with Medicaid. The developmentally disabled community is lobbying pretty effectively to get some of their money.
The speaker also said on Thursday he was going to restore that $18 million.
Their lobby's been very strong.
Yeah.
Because the DD
it's a tough group to.
They've been hurt. So when you look at all of those things, there's 26 million in scoops, which everyone said. The governor said, we'll see if she stays to her word, that if additional monies come in, she would reinstate some of those scoops. So when you add up all of that money, you get breathing room. You can adopt a more responsible budget than was submitted, but you haven't got a $135 million windfall, and some of it may in fact be one time. It's good news. It takes the pressure off. It's like a pressure cooker. Some of the steam has been let out, but the corned beef is still in the cooker, and it's still cooking, and there's still structural problems.
Today at about 9:30, the United States Supreme Court, in the case of filed by Governor Christie on 10th Amendment issues against the NCAA, in a 6-3 ruling.
Was it 6-3?
6-3.
I thought it was 7-2. Okay.
6-3 and a big mix of not on party lines, as they like to say. It was a hodgepodge in the majority, and came down on the side of former Governor Christie and his lawsuit, allowing functionally states to move forward with sports betting. Somewhat breaks up what was considered much of a monopoly by the state of Nevada, although Delaware had some things and a few other states had a little bit of action on this thing. The governor of Rhode Island, Governor Raimondo, had counted on $23.5 million in next year's budget accordingly on this. So it looks like that's going forward. That's a big savior as well in the budget process.
Oh, no question. It still doesn't answer the question, why did you budget money you didn't know you had? So it turned out well. The state's been in the process of choosing a vendor. They've been going back and doing their planning. When we approved gambling at Tiverton and Twin River, it was Class 3 gambling, so it was implicit that
Well, that's what they're arguing.
Well, I was there at the time, and I was director of revenue. We did that, so I think that's
So
the case.
I don't disagree. Although the percentage of the total gaming is tiny that the state's taking, what I think is missing in the calculation is that there is going to be a significant drop in lottery revenue that could equal or be greater to. And then you've got this X factor of the DraftKings and the FanDuels who say, hey, listen, we're going to get into this game in each of the states that are allowing sports betting.
Well, there's a couple of numbers, and then I want to talk about something that's happening in Washington, which people haven't discussed yet. If you break down what the lottery is generating, 18 million is coming from table games.
Yep.
About another 289 million is coming from the VLTs, from the terminals, and the balance comes from various lottery games. Terminal revenue is down.
Yep.
It's well down. The table revenue is
A little bit up.
But they're meeting estimates.
Yep.
Yeah.
And the others are down.
The others are down. And the industry is changing. So what's liable to be impacted by, which has already been impacted, are the other games. And I don't know. I haven't been up there to find out whether the 23 is a net or a gross figure. If it is a gross figure, then you have to watch out. So we'll see.
No, I believe it's a net revenue to the state.
It's a net revenue?
Yeah, the total gaming that they anticipate is around, don't hold me, $780 million
Well, it
would
depends
be.
on how you tax.
Yeah.
Some how you tax the two gambling parlors. So I've seen estimates for anywhere from 28 million down to below 15 million. So it's a reasonable estimate. One interesting thing, and this won't go very far this time, but Orrin Hatch has been playing around with a bill to give the federal government oversight over these activities. And there are some other legislators, some Democratic legislators in New Jersey that are talking about a consumer rights bill to give protection. So I think those things are remote. Wouldn't necessarily bet on them happening. But there'll still be some conversation in Congress.
We are entering into a new era of Wild Wild West in gaming, though. I think you're going to see a lot of high-stakes player. I don't think everybody, Twin River thinks they've got a monopoly on this. I think you're going to see other gaming entities come in and argue about that.
Well,
and you may see a challenge as to whether it's inherently.
But the state has to. This is a critical point in Rhode Island. I think that it's been pretty clear. To gamble in Rhode Island, it has to be the state-owned facility. Twin River and Tiverton are state facilities. So I'm not sure anyone can set up any gambling here that's not offshore that would meet that scripture without a vote of the people.
Except for you could see it if Massachusetts goes with an online version of it, people playing a lot of games online.
Possibly, yeah.
Yeah.
The technology is going to be very interesting, and how you collect that tax will be even more interesting.
As you drive across the line into Seekonk and sit in a parking lot over there and play FanDuel
maybe it's time for a regional sports book. We regionalized Powerball.
Yeah.
Nationalized it.
Yeah.
And so the story's not over, but $23 million is a safe number now in the state budget, I think.
Orrin Hatch, when I always get confused. When do Republicans believe in state rights, and when do they believe in national regulation? They seem to switch on those things every now and then.
It's like the people in California.
Yeah.
It's like the people who say we should have sanctuary cities and ignore the ICE regulations and ignore U.S. immigration laws. So I think states' rights has been a political football in this country long before Abraham Lincoln.
And was Orrin Hatch in the Senate during Abraham Lincoln's?
There are rumors that he was the original Mormon. You know who's going to possibly replace him?
Mitt Romney, isn't
Correct,
it? Yeah,
correct.
Mitt Romney's running for that seat.
And I think there's a interest of the senators from Nevada in looking out for some of their homegrown industries.
Well, I got to tell you, big hit for the state of Nevada.
But that's why the federal that's why these efforts at federal regulation will be tried. I don't think they'll be successful, but that game is still yet to be played.
Let's go over to any other implications for the state budget. Are we going to see a pretty? Now we're just down to a few dollars and cents. Makes life much easier with this enhanced revenue.
Yeah, basically, it's going to fill holes that were built into the original budget. We'll probably wake up when the budget is enacted, still with a structural deficit, probably slightly less. But some of this money could be one time. If you look at what generated the additional money, you have possibly one-time income tax revenue from capital gains.
Right.
You have another 12 or 13 million from the inheritance and gift tax, and you can't schedule those events, and so this gave us breathing room. It gave us necessary breathing room in an election year. It avoided some blood on the floor, and it makes it a lot easier, obviously, to get out.
We're May 14th today. Are we? Is the likelihood that by June 14th, I'm going to go that they're packing up their bags and getting out of Dodge?
I think they'd like to. The magic date is really June 25th, when you have to file for candidacy, and no one wants to be in that building when people are filing for candidacy. So I think if you were handicapping somewhere between June 15th and June 22nd, you'd probably get pretty good odds on that bet.
Let's talk about Vin Messalilla was just in, head of Narragansett Bay Commission. I think it's widely believed that that's probably one of our best run, most successful quasi-public agencies. He has an interest in acquiring the Providence Water Supply Board. Your thoughts?
I think it's premature, and I think it's premature because I don't know how the valuation has been arrived at. They used a method of reproducing what was there, inflating it, and then reducing it for depreciation.
Yeah.
They didn't look at comparable sales. So there's a lot of unanswered questions about the valuation of that board. There are questions too of if you're going to use the money to monetize the pension, and you don't reform the pension system, you've bought, again, some breathing time. You haven't really solved anything, and nothing really is going to change.
Is that a good way to fix your ongoing pension shortfall, is to sell your major asset? And
well, you're not getting a return on your asset right now. PUC's got the city kind of hamstrung.
Yeah.
So if you're not getting a return on that asset, that I think changes the equation. But it's not a good idea to sell an asset to use one-time money to monetize a problem without solving the problem. That's the key point. So if they were going to sell any asset in the water system, being the elephant in the room, and didn't come up with pension reform, and really serious pension reform of you can't take away vested rights, you have to deal with contract issues, but in the future you sure as hell can make some changes. And they need to have almost a situation where for every dollar they get to reduce the unfunded deficit, from on the revenue side, they get a dollar or a fraction of a dollar on the benefit side out over the next 30 years. They haven't done that. There's not I don't sense there's the political will to do that. I know what Mayor Tavares went through in getting his modest pension reforms, done. So there's a question of how it's valued. There's a question of whether there's...
And those are still being litigated.
Right.
I mean, this 5% COLA or 6% COLA is still in dispute.
And there are questions about, whether it's really going to accomplish the objective. And then the other big question, which no one seems to want to answer directly, is how it's going to affect ratepayers. You know,
Mm-hmm.
let's say it was valued at $350 million, which
Sure.
is, people have talked about that number.
Yep.
You know, how is Narragansett Bay or anybody going to capitalize that without getting a revenue stream?
Yep.
And you know, what are the lenders going to demand as a revenue stream? Well, there's only one revenue stream, and that's you and me. That's the ratepayers. So there are too many unanswered questions. I think it would be.
Well, you're down in East Greenwich. You have your own private, what do they bring in bottled water on a daily basis down in East Greenwich?
You know, they bring it from France.
France directly
from France.
into Quonset on the Concorde? Do you still have the Concorde?
They have parachutes that they drop it, you know, on the playing fields of East Greenwich. But no, so those are those tough questions. And you know, you were just talking about when this legislature is going to adjourn. And certainly with the kinds of questions that I've raised, if they made a decision in the next 30 days, there really wouldn't be enough time to have
Yeah, I don't think this is going to happen this session, but it is that time probably to start having, listen, Providence is fairly inept at managing most every asset that it has, whether it's maintaining its schools or maintaining its roads or anything else. So it would seem like a good idea to start having the conversation. Let's stay on Providence, because Providence is rich in entertainment these days. Last week, going into Saturday, Mayor Elorza was having his All-In Education Summit. All-In was the key name of it. That everyone was involved with this, that it was empowering to everybody in Providence, and that both students and he called them educators were involved, except it seems that he didn't want Providence teachers involved with the event, and so told the head of the teachers union, Mary Beth Calabro, and correspondingly said that, listen, there's going to be a lot of people of color at the event, and they don't like Providence teachers. Seemed bizarre messaging. His staff did not deny that conversation took place. She was emphatic that those were his words. Have we lost our mind on this one?
Well, you're asking me to comment on something I know nothing about, so that's going to be difficult. I think, you know, I would comment, you know, this way, that for generations, urban kids, particularly minority kids, low-income, needy kids, have been sent to schools, and they've been in failing schools, and nothing changes. And all the adults are responsible for it.
100%.
You know, and so to say that teacher unions aren't part of the problem, they're part of the problem. Not I'm talking about this mayor, but the city administration is part of the problem. You know, adults and parents are part of the problem, because some that could send their kids to private schools don't worry what's happening in the public school after the 6th grade. And the state's part of the problem too, because there have been, you know, lawsuits that we've been involved with, Steve Robinson, Sam Zuri, and others. I go back to Sasse in '81 with a suit, where Judge Needham ruled on behalf of school equity, and that was reversed by the Supreme Court. And so we as adults have not, you know, stepped up and adequately resourced, but with accountability. Just don't throw money at the problem. We haven't done that. We've lobbied for years to deaf ears that Rhode Island is one of the few states that a constitutional right to an adequate education doesn't exist. Adequate education is what the legislature, you know, says it is. So they've got the political will issue. You got a declining tax base. You have adults that have been absent, and it's a very political system. I can remember. I don't want to, you know, speak ill of you know, people that are no longer with us. But the teacher contract being settled when somebody walked into the mayor's office, and right before an election said, I need 5%. And the mayor said 3%, and it was 4%, and it was labor peace. But really without talking about, okay, what were we buying for this COLA and this change. So that's been the history. So I'm not surprised that there's miscommunication and you know, between the various elements, because the political will and leadership is not there. Now, having said that, I have been impressed with the new superintendent of Providence. I think, you know, we had a conference. We're working, this is the Haskell Institute and others, with Columbia University, Teachers College and the Law School, on looking at the equity issue and bringing it back before the courts, this time a national or federal court. So there are all those, I'll give you a long answer to a short question, But that's what's there. That's the real problem. That's what's there, and that's what we fix.
So, but I agree with everything you've said. It's been a generational failure.
Several generations, yes.
And there's been a lack of leadership. It's a third rail issue for mayors. No mayor wants to jump into it. Most of the active, affluent voters have already found a solution to education. They send their kids to Moses Brown or LaSalle or Wheeler or some other private option. The schools are left primarily to those of color and primarily to those who are of lower income. And all that being true, it would seem to be a strange utterance that you would, if you're trying to make some progress, wouldn't want the teachers involved.
All right, now teachers are part of the solution. Of course, you have to get the teachers involved.
And and by the way, if they're not part of the solution, they're gonna be your problem.
Right. Now the question is, how do you do it? Do you work through the unions? Do you work through the school buildings? So there are a lot of different ways to get teachers involved, but you can't. The most important adult in the school building is the person that's reacting before 25 or 30 kids.
Right.
And their opinions, should be valued. On the other hand, when different mayors around the country, Chicago is a great example, have tried to reform the system, they got mud from union issues. It became protecting the adults versus servicing the kids.
The budget, the new budget reality, is that a win for Gina Raimondo and a loss for Alan Fung and Patricia Morgan, or is that the lack of a coherent budgeting process makes that a toss-up or a negative for Governor Raimondo?
I'm not sure. I haven't thought about it. It's a win to the extent that there's less controversy.
Yeah.
Okay. So for an election, controversy and wheeling and dealing and backroom stuff and saying no is not a good thing for the incumbent to do. So to that extent, it's helpful. But the real issue, people don't pay attention, to the budget. They know they'll be paying a little more taxes on security services, on software, those that smoke, on cigarettes. There'll be higher fees. Some of the money that was meant for roads is being taken away. But they don't sit down and they're not budget analysts. They don't sit down and say, well, is this budget good for me or bad for me? And so I don't think it'll have much of an impact because people have pretty much made up their mind or making up their minds about what they think of the quality of state government, whether they think the state government is being responsive. And in this age of Trump, say what you want about Trump, and I'm not a Trump supporter, he hit a sore spot where a lot of people, felt government wasn't focused or interested in their problems. And so that's the bigger issue. And these people have defined their personalities. So I think by the time September, October, November, roll around, there'll be discussion on what I've just mentioned, not the budget, but in the short run, it certainly helps by getting controversy off the table.
Gina Raimondo seems to be articulating that her re-election campaign is about building, right? She's building, she's going to rebuild the schools with a big bond issue. She's got a few cranes in the sky. She's got some hotels coming up, and we've talked about whether or not those are good. Are you seeing anyone else in the gubernatorial class beginning to define what their economic vision is for Rhode Island?
I think, I think the real issue gets down to how you use your resource. Are you going to restructure it, invest in people, or are you going to just invest in brick and mortar? And with the economy doing better, we still are stuck with the same opinion polls on right direction, wrong direction, approval. No one's going out and voting for somebody because they got a crane in the sky, building an apartment that in their wildest dreams they couldn't afford to rent or buy a condo in. So it's mixed. There'll be some projects that people will see as some benefit. There are projects that you and I might think are good investments, but the average guy, is not going to get too excited about a fancy 46-story structure that a brown kid needs $3,000 a month to move into, because that family's probably not making $3,000 a month. And so there's a basic disconnect. And this has been the problem, I think, for this administration all along, is they're focus is, top down, not bottom up. And Rhode Island's a small place with a lot of populism before populism was
Yeah, we're good at populism.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
so I don't think people see it as a bottom-up strategy.
Any other thoughts?
Oh, no, it's going to be spring. It's time to...
It's finally spring. I think this is our first spring broadcast.
Well, it's a beautiful day outside.
It is absolutely a beautiful day. We will let the money man go. There's got to be multiple options in the rest of your afternoon. Is it golfing at Point Judith?
No.
Is it boating down in Newport? Is it helicoptering someplace?
That's going to give my dog a bath, actually.
Giving his dog a bath. The money man is giving his dog a bath. And with how many assistants? 5, 6, 7 assistants, one to do the pedicure.
Well, we have a,
one,
we
yeah,
have a
you have a
nail
team.
clipper.
Yeah.
We have a team.
Yeah.
It's a team dog.
Well, it is never dull in Rhode Island. I want to thank the money man, Gary Sasse, for joining us on Business Monday here at the Navigant Credit Union Broadcast Center. We're going to be right back with Mr. Innovation, Saul Kaplan, talking about everything from who's innovating and who's being disrupted. We'll be right back.